If you compare a typical dinner plate from 1940 to one from today, the difference is striking. Before 1950, most meals were cooked at home from basic ingredients. Food was seasonal, locally sourced, and minimally processed. Sugar was used sparingly. Eating out was occasional. Snacking was limited. Portions were smaller. After 1950, however, the food landscape began to shift dramatically. Those changes reshaped not only what we eat, but how often we eat, how food is produced, and how our bodies respond to it. Understanding what changed helps explain many of today's health challenges. One of the biggest transformations after 1950 was the rise of industrial food processing. Advances in manufacturing, preservation, and transportation allowed food companies to produce items on a massive scale. Canned goods had existed before, but now frozen dinners, boxed meals, shelf-stable snacks, and instant mixes became mainstream. Convenience became a selling point. Food no longer requires preparation from scratch. It could be heated, microwaved, or eaten straight from a package. Alongside processing came refinement. Grains that were once consumed whole were increasingly stripped of fiber and nutrients to improve texture and shelf life. White flour and refined cereals became dominant. To compensate for lost nutrients, manufacturers added synthetic vitamins back in, but the structural fiber and natural balance of the original grain were altered. The result was food that digested faster and spiked blood sugar more rapidly. Sugar consumption also increased significantly after 1950. Sugar had always been part of the human diet, but post-war agricultural policies and food technology made it cheaper and more abundant. Soft drinks grew in popularity. Breakfast cereals became sweeter. Desserts became everyday items rather than occasional treats. In the 1970s, high-fructose corn syrup was introduced as a low-cost sweetener, further increasing sugar availability in processed foods. Sweetness became normalized at every meal, not just at celebrations. Portion sizes expanded as well. In the mid-20th century, restaurants began competing by offering more food for the same price. Over time, what was once considered large became standard. Plates grew bigger. Cups grew larger. Snack packages expanded. The average calorie intake quietly rose, not necessarily because people chose to overeat, but because the environment encouraged it. Another major shift involved fats. In the decades after 1950, dietary guidelines increasingly emphasized reducing saturated fat. Food manufacturers responded by creating low-fat products. However, removing fat often reduced flavor, so sugar and refined starches were added to maintain taste and texture. Ironically, many low-fat foods ended up being highly processed and high in carbohydrates. Meanwhile, industrial seed oils became widely used in packaged foods because they were inexpensive and shelf-stable. The way food was marketed changed, too. Television advertising exploded in the 1950s and 1960s. Companies began marketing directly to children with colorful packaging and cartoon mascots. Brand loyalty formed early. Food became entertainment. Emotional associations were deliberately built into products. Convenience foods were marketed as modern, efficient, and desirable, especially to households with two working parents. Agriculture itself transformed. After World War II, fertilizers, pesticides, and mechanization increased crop yields dramatically. Monocropping became common, with vast fields devoted to single crops like corn and soy. These crops became the foundation for processed food ingredients, from corn syrup to hydrogenated oils. Food became more abundant and cheaper in terms of dollars per calorie. Fast food chains expanded rapidly in the post-1950 era. Restaurants that prioritized speed, uniformity, and affordability spread nationwide. Meals became standardized and engineered for consistency. Eating outside the home shifted from occasional indulgence to regular habit. With that shift came higher calorie density, more refined carbohydrates, and larger portions. Snacking culture also intensified. Before 1950, eating was structured around meals. Afterward, packaged snack foods became widely available. Chips, crackers, candy bars, and baked goods could be eaten anytime. Vending machines appeared in workplaces and schools. Food was no longer confined to the kitchen table. It followed people into cars, offices, and classrooms. Food preservation methods evolved as well. Hydrogenation allowed oils to remain solid at room temperature, creating margarine and extending shelf life. While convenient, partially hydrogenated oils introduced trans fats into the food supply, which were later linked to increased heart disease risk. It took decades before regulations limited their use. Another significant change was the decline in home cooking skills. As processed and ready-made foods became common, fewer people learned traditional cooking methods. Recipes relying on whole ingredients were replaced with boxed mixes and pre-made sauces. Time spent preparing meals decreased. Convenience often replaced craftsmanship. Fiber intake gradually declined as refined grains replaced whole grains and vegetable consumption stagnated. Dietary patterns shifted toward higher calorie density and lower nutrient density. At the same time, daily physical activity decreased due to changes in work and transportation. Office jobs became more common. Cars replaced walking in many communities. Why does all this matter today? Since 1950, rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome have increased significantly. While many factors contribute, the transformation of the food environment plays a central role. Highly processed foods are engineered to be hyperpalatable, meaning they stimulate reward pathways in the brain strongly. They are easy to overconsume because they require little chewing, digest quickly, and often lack the fiber and protein that promote fullness. Frequent blood sugar spikes from refined carbohydrates can increase hunger shortly after eating. Added sugars in beverages provide calories without creating satiety. Larger portions normalize higher intake. Constant snacking reduces natural hunger and fullness rhythms. Over time, these patterns can lead to chronic energy surplus. The food environment after 1950 also shifted responsibility from scarcity to abundance management. For most of human history, obtaining enough calories was the primary challenge. In the modern era, managing excess availability is the challenge. Food is accessible 24 hours a day. Grocery stores carry thousands of packaged items. Marketing encourages frequent consumption. Another important factor is food texture and speed. Many processed foods are soft, crispy, or melt in the mouth. This reduces chewing time and allows calories to be consumed rapidly before fullness signals register. Whole foods, by contrast, require more effort to eat and tend to be self-limiting. Social norms evolved alongside food. Celebrations, meetings, sports events, and even casual gatherings increasingly revolve around calorie-dense snacks and sugary drinks. Portion distortion affects the perception of what is normal. A serving size from the 1950s often looks small compared to modern expectations. Economic incentives also matter. Processed foods made from subsidized crops can be cheaper per calorie than fresh produce. Families under financial pressure may gravitate toward inexpensive, shelf-stable options. Convenience becomes a practical necessity rather than a choice. None of this means food before 1950 was perfect, or that all modern foods are harmful. Food safety improved dramatically after the mid-century. Refrigeration, pasteurization, and regulation reduced foodborne illness. Year-round produce increased dietary variety. Nutrient fortification addressed certain deficiencies. The issue is not progress itself, but imbalance. More convenient and more heavily marketed, those changes made life easier in many ways. They also introduced new challenges that we are still learning to manage. Recognizing this history allows for smarter decisions today. The goal is not fear, it is literacy. When you know how the system evolved, you can make choices aligned with long-term health rather than short-term convenience. If this helped you see food differently, like, subscribe, and comment below. Share your thoughts on what changes you have noticed in your own kitchen and what topics you want explored next.